I'm Captain Tori Meyers, and I was 32 the morning my mom begged me to hide who I was. She stood in my childhood doorway holding a blue dress on a hanger, and she asked me not to wear my uniform to my brother's wedding. "The military is embarrassing," she said. "Just this once. Blend in." I had flown 1,100 miles for that wedding. I had kept my mouth shut for years, but standing there in that hallway, I understood something I'd been avoiding for a very long time. She had no idea who would be sitting in that ballroom. And honestly, neither did I. What happened when I finally walked through those doors is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where families learn that the people they overlooked were the strongest ones in the room. If quiet dignity is your kind of justice, you're home. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe, because this one is going to stay with you. Let me back up, because you need to know who I was before that doorway. My apartment near base fits in a duffel bag. I like it that way. I keep my boots by the door and my coffee strong, and most nights I'm asleep by 9. The Marines I serve with know me better than my own family ever tried to. We've eaten out of the same cans. We've stood the same watches. When one of us has a bad night, the others stay up. That's the closest thing to a family I've ever fully trusted. My blood family is a different country, with a language I never quite learned. I'm the older sibling, the one who left at 18 and didn't come back the way they wanted. I send birthday cards. I show up for funerals. I carry the heavy bags so nobody has to ask. That's been my whole role in the Myers family for as long as I can remember. Keep the peace. Take the weight. Don't make it weird. So when my mother called and asked me to fly home for Wes's wedding, I said yes before she finished the sentence. I always say yes. I booked the flight. I pressed my uniform out of habit. And I told myself this trip would be simple. A toast, a dance, a flight home. I am very good at planning operations. I am terrible at predicting my own family. Here's the part I still don't understand about myself even now. I can stand calm under fire. I can give an order with people's lives in my hands. But put my mother in front of me with a disappointed face, and I shrink to half my size. That weekend, I found out exactly how much that habit had cost me. The thing about being overlooked is that it happens slowly. There's no single moment. There are 1,000 small ones. When I enlisted, my mother told the neighbors I was taking some time to figure things out. When I was commissioned, she didn't come to the ceremony. She had a charity luncheon she couldn't move. When I got promoted, she changed the subject to my cousin's new kitchen. Over the years, I learned to stop bringing it up. I'd mention a deployment and watch her smile go tight and polite. I'd start to say something about my work, and she'd find a reason to refill the iced tea. Once, at a backyard party, a neighbor asked what I did, and before I could answer, my mother said it for me. "Oh, Tori's in the service. It's a phase. She'll land somewhere sensible." "The military is embarrassing," she'd say to my father in the kitchen, not knowing the vents carried sound straight up to my old room. I heard that line through the floor when I was 24. I heard it again at 28. By 30, I'd stopped flinching. I just got quieter. I stopped explaining a long time ago. You can't argue someone into respecting you. I'd figured that out the hard way. So I became the daughter who sent money on Mother's Day and never talked about her job, and everyone in that family seemed perfectly comfortable with the arrangement. Nobody ever asked what I actually did out there. Not once. Not my mother, not my father, not my brother. They had a version of me in their heads, and it was easier for everyone if I matched it. The strange thing is, I almost did. Right up until I couldn't anymore. My brother Wes was always the bright one. Not smarter, just easier to be proud of. He went to a good school, got a finance job downtown, and wore the kind of watch that says something about your future. My mother lit up around him the way she never did around me. When he called to say he was engaged, she cried for an hour. The good kind of crying. The girl's name was Sloane Whitfield, and the way my mother said the name, you'd think it was a title. The Whitfields were old money. Real old money. The quiet kind, with a family name on a building somewhere, and a house that had been in the family for 3 generations. To my mother, this engagement wasn't just Wes getting married. It was the family arriving somewhere it had been climbing toward her whole life. "We're finally going to be the kind of family people respect," she told me on the phone, and I noticed she said, "finally," like the rest of us had been holding her back. So the wedding became a campaign. The right caterer, the right flowers, the right everyone. I got assigned a small supporting role. Show up. Smile. Don't draw attention. I was used to that. What I wasn't used to was Sloane herself. The first time we spoke on the phone, she asked me about my actual life. Not the polite version. The real one. She asked good questions and listened to the answers, and at the end, she said something that surprised me. "I'm so glad Wes has a sister like you," she said. I didn't know what to do with that. Nobody in my own family had said anything close to it in years. I should have wondered, right then, what kind of family raised a girl who'd say that. To be fair to my mother, and I am trying to be fair, you have to understand where she came from. Her father, my grandfather, came home from Vietnam a different man than the one who left. He drank. He couldn't hold a job. The family moved every year or two, chasing cheaper rent. And my mother spent her childhood being the new girl in clothes that didn't fit. She told me once, in a rare, soft moment, about a teacher who held up her shoes in front of the class. She was 11. She never forgot it. To her, the uniform my grandfather wore wasn't honor. It was the start of everything that went wrong. It meant noise at night and empty cupboards and a father who scared her. So she spent her entire adult life climbing away from it. The right neighborhood, the right friends, the country club membership she could barely afford. And then her own daughter put on a uniform and walked straight back into the thing she'd run from. That's the part nobody in those revenge stories ever explains. My mother didn't hate me. She was terrified of what I represented. Every ribbon on my chest looked to her like a slide back down into the poverty and shame she'd clawed out of. I understood that. I really did. Understanding it didn't make it hurt less. Because here's the thing about being someone's fear instead of their daughter. You spend your whole life being managed, hidden, softened, kept out of the good light. And no matter how calm you are about it, a part of you keeps waiting to be claimed. I had been waiting a long time. I just didn't know how long until that weekend forced me to count. The ask came 2 days before the wedding. I was in my old bedroom, unzipping my garment bag, when my mother knocked once and let herself in. She had a dress over her arm, a long, soft, expensive blue. She laid it on the bed like an offering. "I thought you could wear this," she said. "It's your size." I looked at it and then at her. She wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "The Whitfields are very refined," she went on, talking faster now. "The whole evening is black tie. A uniform would be, well, a lot. People will stare. It's not that kind of crowd." I told her I'd planned to wear my dress blues, that it's perfectly appropriate, that officers wear them to weddings all the time. She shook her head before I finished. "Just wear the blue dress," she said. "For once, blend in." There it was. The line landed soft, almost kind, and that's what made it cut. She wasn't yelling. She was asking me, gently, to disappear. I stood there holding the hanger of my uniform in one hand and the hanger of her dress in the other, like a scale. And I felt the old reflex kick in, the one that says, "Keep the peace, take the weight, don't make it weird." I almost said yes. God help me, I almost said it. I told her I'd think about it. She smiled, relieved, and squeezed my arm, and said she knew I'd understand. Then she left the dress on my bed and went downstairs to call the florist. I sat down next to that blue dress for a long time. I'd carried heavier things than a dress, but somehow that one felt like it might break me. Here's a confession. I'm not the kind of person who fights back loudly. That's not modesty. It's a real flaw, and it's cost me. The skill that keeps people alive in a firefight is the same one that lets you stand still while your own family erases you. You learn to absorb. You learn to wait. You learn that your discomfort is cheaper than everyone else's. So you eat it. My counselor on base once called it over-responsibility, like it was a thing you could put down. I never could. That night, I sat on the floor of my old room and reached into the inside pocket of my uniform jacket, where I keep one thing always: a challenge coin. Plain, heavy, the edges worn smooth from my thumb. A friend gave it to me, a long time ago, and I've carried it every single day since. I turned it over in my palm the way I always do when I need to remember who I actually am. I'm not going to tell you the whole story of that coin yet. I can't. Not in one breath. But I'll tell you this. Whatever my mother thought the uniform meant, it didn't mean a phase. It didn't mean a costume. It meant a morning I will never get to forget, and people I will never get to see again. I sat there with the coin in one hand and the blue dress beside me, and I thought, you have stood in worse rooms than a ballroom. You have. The trouble was, I'd never once stood up to her. I'd faced down things that could kill me, unsure of itself, the way real money is. There were portraits on the walls and a library with a ladder and a back lawn that ran down to water. My mother moved through it like she'd been rehearsing for this her whole life, laughing a little too brightly, touching people's arms. She introduced Wes to everyone. She introduced me to almost no one. When someone did ask about me, she had her line ready. "Oh, Tori's between things right now," she'd say, and steer them toward the cheese board. I let it happen. I always let it happen. I found a quiet corner with a glass of water and watched my family perform. But two things caught my eye that night, and I didn't think much of either one at the time. The first was a photograph on a side table, an old black and white of a young man in a uniform I recognized from history, a Marine, jaw set, eyes steady. The second was an older gentleman across the room, silver-haired, straight-backed, who looked at me a beat too long. He didn't say anything. He just held my gaze, gave the smallest nod, and turned away. I figured he was being polite. Something about that house felt familiar to me, and I couldn't say why. I chalked it up to nerves and old wood and the smell of furniture polish. I should have paid attention. I was so busy making myself small that I missed the most important thing in the room. The Whitfields were not who my mother thought they were, and by the time I figured that out, it would already be too late to take it back. Back in my old room that night, I unzipped the garment bag all the way and looked at the dress blues hanging there in the lamplight. The dark coat, the standing collar, the eagle, globe, and anchor catching the light on each button. I don't talk about it much, but the first time I was allowed to wear that uniform, my hands shook. Not from fear, from the weight of what it asked of you. There are rules for everything on it. Nothing extra. No flourishes. Every ribbon has to be earned, and earned in a specific way, and you wear them in a specific order, and there is no faking any of it. That's what I love about it, honestly. It can't lie. It tells the exact truth about a person whether they want it told or not. I ran my thumb along the rows on the chest and stopped where I always stop. The blue dress was still folded on the chair where my mother had left it. Soft, pretty, anonymous. The kind of thing you wear when you want to be remembered as nice and nothing else. I held the two of them up, one in each hand, the way I had 2 nights before. And I noticed something. When I imagined walking in wearing the dress, I felt relief. When I imagined walking in wearing the blues, I felt afraid. And for the first time in years, the fear interested me more than the relief. Fear usually means you're close to something that matters. I zipped the garment bag back up without deciding, and I set it by the door. I told myself I still had time. What I didn't have time for was the conversation that came the next morning, before I'd even had coffee. Wes found me in the kitchen at 7. He had 2 mugs, and the careful face of a man about to ask for something. He set the coffee down and leaned against the counter and tried to sound casual. "So, the uniform thing," he said. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, it's just, the Whitfields are kind of formal, and I don't want it to be a whole thing, you know? It's my one day. I want it to go smooth. Just be normal for one day. For me." There it was again, dressed up in different clothes. Be normal. As if I'd been abnormal all along. I looked at my little brother, the boy I taught to ride a bike, The man who'd never once asked what I did overseas, and I saw it clearly. He wasn't cruel. He was scared. Scared his refined new in-laws would see his strange older sister, the one with the short hair and the careful posture, and the stories he didn't understand. And underneath that, something he'd never admit. He was scared that next to me, in that uniform, he might come out smaller. He'd spent his whole life as the easy one to be proud of, and on some level he knew it had never been tested. I didn't say any of that. I just asked him a question. "Wes, do you even know what I did over there?" He blinked. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "Sure," he said finally. "You know, marine stuff." That was it. That was the whole answer. My own brother, on his wedding day, and the sum total of his curiosity about my life was marine stuff. I told him I'd be there, and I'd behave, and I walked out before he could see my face. The family lunch that day was a chorus. Aunts, an uncle, 2 cousins, all gathered around my mother's table, and the topic, eventually, was me. It started gently. "So Tori, are you seeing anyone?" When I said no, my Aunt Carol made a soft, sad sound, like I'd reported a death. "You know," she said, "you're not getting younger, and that life can't go on forever." That life. My uncle chimed in that he'd read the military was downsizing. Wasn't I worried? A cousin asked if I'd ever thought about a real career once I got out. Each one landed like a small stone, and I sat there and let them stack up, smiling, passing the rolls. My mother watched it happen with quiet satisfaction. This was her family, speaking her language, confirming her version of me. I had spent so many years being the one who absorbs that I didn't even notice I'd gone silent. I just got smaller and smaller at that table until I was barely there. But there was one person who didn't join in. My Aunt Diane, my mother's younger sister, sat at the far end and didn't say a word. She kept looking at me, then down at her plate, then at my mother, and her mouth went thin and unhappy. At one point she started to say something, then stopped herself and reached for her water instead. I noticed it the way you notice a door left open in a house you thought was empty. I didn't know what it meant yet, but Aunt Diane knew something the rest of the table didn't, and it was eating at her. 2 hours later, she would do the thing that changed the whole weekend, and she would do it almost by accident. After lunch, I went upstairs and did something I'm not proud of. I tried on the blue dress. I told myself I was just checking the fit. That's a lie. I was trying to see if I could disappear, and whether disappearing might be easier than the alternative. The dress fit perfectly, of course. My mother had a good eye. I stood in front of the old mirror in my childhood room and looked at the woman in the soft blue fabric, and she was lovely, and she was a stranger. She had no edges. She had no story. She was exactly what everyone downstairs wanted me to be, which is to say, she was nobody in particular. The woman in the mirror was someone I'd been pretending to be for years, and seeing her so clearly made my chest ache. I thought, I could do this. I could wear this dress, get through the toast, get on the plane, and keep the peace the way I always have. Nobody would be hurt. Everyone would be comfortable. And I would go home and put the coin back in the uniform jacket and tell myself it didn't matter what they saw, because I knew the truth. Except I'd been telling myself that for 10 years, and it had quietly become a way to never have to be brave in front of the only people who could actually wound me. I stood there in that beautiful, empty dress, and I felt the decision sitting somewhere just out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue. Dress or blues? Disappear or be seen? I still hadn't decided when my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a text from Aunt Diane. No words. Just a screenshot. I picked it up, and the whole floor tilted. Before I tell you what was in that screenshot, I have to tell you about the coin, because the two things hit me in the same hour and I can't separate them anymore. The coin was Danny's. Lance Corporal Danny Brennan, 19 years old, from a town in Ohio with one stoplight. Danny was the kid who kept candy in his cargo pocket and gave it away. He used to call me ma'am in this exaggerated, grinning way that should have been annoying, and somehow wasn't. The week before everything went wrong, he pressed this coin into my hand after a long day and said, "For luck, ma'am, you carry it." I laughed and tried to give it back. He wouldn't take it. So I kept it. I still have it. He doesn't. That's the part of the story I don't say out loud, even now, 6 years later. There was a road, and a morning, and a vehicle that should have made it through, and didn't. 3 of my Marines came home because of choices made in about 90 seconds. Danny was not one of the 3. I have gone over those 90 seconds more times than I can count, and I have made my peace with most of it. The way you make peace with a thing that will never be finished. The coin is how I carry him. Every day in my pocket, against my heart, where the metal of my life. I held the coin tight in my fist. Then I looked back down at my phone, and I read the screenshot. And everything changed. The screenshot was from a group text. It was titled Wedding Logistics, and it had everyone in it. My mother, my father, Wes, the aunts, the cousins, everyone except me. Aunt Diane had sent it to me alone, with no message, the way you hand someone the truth and step back. I read it once and didn't believe it. Then I read it again. My mother had written, that morning, a series of messages I can still recite from memory. Please make sure no one encourages Tori to wear the uniform. The Whitfields are extremely refined and it would be humiliating. Seat her at table 9, near the back, away from the head table. And then the line, typed out, in a family group chat, for everyone but me to see. The military is embarrassing and I won't have her turning Wes's wedding into a parade. There were little thumbs-up reactions under it. A cousin had replied, LOL agreed. Wes had replied with a single word. Fine. My father had not replied at all. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed in a borrowed blue dress and read it a third time. The strange thing is, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I went very, very still, the way I get when something serious is happening and panic would only cost lives. There's a kind of calm that isn't peace. It's the calm right before a decision. I set the phone down on the bedspread, screen up, my mother's words still glowing there. Table 9, near the back. A parade. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down very, very gently, like it might go off. And I sat there in the quiet and let myself understand, finally, exactly what my place in this family had always been. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't rage. People expect rage. Rage would have been easier. What I felt was clarity, cold and clean, like stepping outside into winter air. For 10 years I'd told myself a story. The story was that my family didn't understand me, but that underneath it all, they loved me. And the hiding was just my mother's way, and someday they'd come around. That story died on that bedspread. They understood me fine. They'd decided. I picked the phone back up and read the chat one more time, slower, and that's when I saw it. The timestamps. My mother sent the message at 11:40. My father's phone, the chat showed, had read it at 11:42. He saw it. He read the words, "The military is embarrassing," 2 minutes after she typed them, on the morning of his son's wedding, about his daughter. And he said nothing. Not a single word. The silence was its own message, and I'd been receiving it my whole life without ever reading it correctly. My father wasn't the quiet, good man caught in the middle that I'd cast him as. He was a man who watched me get erased, year after year, and chose comfort over me every single time. That hurt worse than my mother's line somehow. Her cruelty at least cost her something, a fear she was running from. His cost him nothing. He just had to stay quiet, and he was so good at that. I stood up. I took off the blue dress. I hung it back on the chair, smoothed it flat, almost tenderly, like saying goodbye to a version of myself. I wasn't angry. I was done disappearing. The only question left was how. That afternoon, I went over to the venue early, because I needed air and a task. The reception was being held in the ballroom of a historic club the Whitfields had used for generations. I walked the room while the staff set tables, just to ground myself, the way I'd walk a position before anything happened. And I started noticing things. There was a small brass plaque by the entrance I'd missed before, dedicating a scholarship fund in someone's memory. There was a display case in the hall with old photographs, and more than one of them showed men in uniform. Then Sloane found me, lovely and a little frazzled in her rehearsal clothes, and we walked a slow lap together. She pointed at one of the photographs without slowing down. "That's my grandfather," she said, warm and easy. "He served. He's the reason this whole family is the way it is." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like everyone knew. And then she got pulled away by a question about chairs. I stood in front of that photograph for a second. An old man, young in the picture, a uniform I knew in my bones. The reason this whole family is the way it is. Something turned over in the back of my mind, quiet and slow, but I was too full of my own decision to chase it. I filed it away. I keep doing that, in this story, don't I? Noticing the most important thing and walking right past it. In my defense, I had a lot on my mind. I had spent the afternoon deciding to stop hiding from my family. I had no idea that the family I was marrying my brother into had spent generations learning to honor exactly what mine was ashamed of. The night before the wedding, I made my choice. I laid the dress blues out on the bed, flat and square, and I went over every inch. I want you to understand this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't planning to ruin anyone's day. I wasn't going to give a speech or cause a scene or say a single word about that group chat. I was simply going to stop helping them hide me. There's a difference, and it matters. My mother had asked me to disappear for everyone's comfort. I'd done that for a decade. I was just, finally, going to show up as myself. I pinned the medals carefully, in their order, each one a date and a name. And when I came to one of them, my fingers slowed and then stopped, and I had to set it down and pick it back up twice before I got it pinned straight. My hands were not steady. They are steady under almost anything. They were not steady then. I sat with the uniform a long time. Now, let me say something to you directly, because I think some of you know exactly where I was sitting. I almost wore that blue dress. I almost made myself smaller again, because it was the path that hurt the fewest people, and I'm the kind of person who counts that. If you have ever been asked to hide the best part of yourself just to keep the peace at a family table, then you know precisely how heavy that hanger felt in my hand. Stay with me, because what happened when I finally stopped shrinking is the reason I'm telling this at all. Comment the word "seen" if you've been there too, and subscribe, because the rest of this you'll want to watch all the way through. The day of the wedding, I arrived at the venue before most of the guests, with my garment bag over my shoulder, and I made one decision that I think tells you everything about how I wanted to handle this. I didn't wear the uniform to the ceremony. I changed into simple clothes and I slipped into a back pew, because the ceremony was Wes and Sloane's, not mine, and I would not pull a single eye away from them on their day. That was my line. Whatever I felt about my family, my brother deserved his vows in peace. So I sat in the back and watched my baby brother get married. And here's the part that surprised me. I cried. Real tears. The good kind. He looked terrified and happy, and Sloane looked at him like he was the answer to a question, and for a few minutes none of the other stuff mattered. I'm not made of stone. I love him. Even now. Even after the group chat. That's the cruel arithmetic of family. You can know exactly how little someone has fought for you and still love them with your whole chest. I let myself have that. The ceremony ended. The guests drifted toward the ballroom for the reception, 200 yards across a manicured lawn, and the staff opened the great doors, and the string quartet started up, and the room filled with the soft clink of glasses. 150 people. The Whitfields' whole world, and my family scattered among them, my mother already working the room. I waited until the room was full and warm and loud. Then I walked to the side room where my garment bag was hanging, and I closed the door, and I took out my dress blues. I almost made it. I had the coat on and the medals straight, and I was reaching for the door when it opened and my mother stepped in. She saw the uniform and her whole face changed. It went white, then pink, then something close to panic. "What are you doing?" she said, low and fast, pulling the door shut behind her so no one would hear. Tori. We talked about this. I told her quietly that I'd thought about it, and that I was going to wear my uniform to my brother's wedding, and that I wasn't going to make a scene, and that she could trust me on that. She didn't hear a word of it. She stepped close, and her voice dropped to that hiss I knew from childhood, the one that came through the kitchen vents. "The military is embarrassing," she said, and there it was again. The line, naked this time, no softening. "Just wear the blue dress. For once in your life, blend in. These are not our kind of people," she said, "and you do not get to turn Wes's wedding into a parade." Her hands were actually trembling, and I saw, under the cruelty, the scared 11-year-old in the shoes the teacher held up. I did. I felt for her. And I still said no. "Don't you dare embarrass us in there," she whispered, and her eyes were wet, and I understood she meant it as a plea and a threat at once. I looked at my mother, and I said the only thing I had left. "Mom," I said, "I'm not the embarrassing one." And then I reached past her, and I opened the door, and I walked out into the light and the music before either of us could take a single word of it back. Now, I need you to picture the geometry of this, because it matters. The ballroom was enormous, with a high ceiling and tall in from a side door near the back, which meant that to reach my assigned seat, table 9, near the back, exactly where my mother had ordered, I only had to slip along the wall. I didn't have to cross the room. I didn't have to be seen. I could have made myself small even now, in the uniform, just by hugging the edge. And for a second, I did. Old habits. I started along the wall toward the back, toward my place, the place chosen for me. I want to be clear that I wasn't trying to be noticed. I'd promised myself and my brother that I wouldn't make a scene, and I meant it. I was just going to take my seat at table 9 and be quietly, completely myself, and let that be enough. I had no plan beyond that. No speech, no moment. Just a uniform and a seat near the back, and a coin in my pocket. I had taken maybe 10 steps along that wall when I felt the air in the room change. You learn to feel that. A shift in attention, the way a crowd's noise drops a half step when something is happening. I didn't know what it was yet. I kept walking, eyes forward, toward table 9. And across the room, near the head table, an old man with silver hair and a straight back set down his glass and got slowly to his feet. "Let me slow down, because I skipped something and you deserve the full picture of who walked into that room." A few minutes earlier, in that side room, before my mother burst in, I had stood in front of a mirror and put myself together piece by piece. The dark coat, the collar high and snug, the white gloves, and the medals, in their rows, including the one in the place of honor, the gold star with the small silver star at its center, on a ribbon of red and white and blue, the weight of it real against my chest. I'd reached into the coat and found Danny's coin in the inner pocket, where it always rides, and I'd held it for a second against my palm. I said his name out loud, just once, the way I do. Brennan. Then I put the coin away, over my heart, behind the medals, where it belonged. I looked at myself in that mirror and I didn't see a parade. I didn't see an embarrassment. I saw a Marine. I saw every road and every watch and every name. I saw the truth that uniform can't help but tell, and I thought, quietly, this is what I look like. Not the daughter at table 9, not the phase. This. So when I walked out into that ballroom, I wasn't walking in to win anything. I was walking in to stop lying. There's a difference between revenge and refusing to disappear, and that whole afternoon I'd been learning to tell them apart. I just wanted to take my seat as myself, for once, in the body and the history that were actually mine. I didn't know the room was full of people who would understand exactly what they were looking at. I was about to find out. Heads turn slowly at first, when something is off pattern. One person glances over, then their neighbor follows the glance, and it spreads outward like a ring on water. That's what happened as I crossed the back of that ballroom in dress blues. A woman near me stopped mid-sentence. A man touched his wife's elbow and nodded toward me. The string quartet kept playing, but the talking dimmed, just slightly. the way a room quiets when it isn't sure yet what it's seeing. I kept my eyes forward and my pace even, the way you learn to move when you don't want to startle anyone. I found my mother in the crowd without meaning to. She was near the center of the room, mid-laugh with a circle of Whitfield guests, and I watched the laugh fall off her face as she saw me. She went rigid. Her hand found her own throat. Across from her, my father turned to see what she was staring at, and his expression did something complicated I couldn't read from that distance. Wes, at the head table, half rose out of his chair. For a second nobody moved. Not toward me, not away. The whole room hung on that hinge where it could still tip either way, toward awkwardness, toward whispers, toward my mother's worst nightmare of a parade, and I felt the old fear rise one last time, the voice that said, "Sit down, hug the wall, take your seat at the back, don't make it weird." I almost listened. I really almost did. But before that voice could win, before my mother could compose her face into something polite, the old man with the silver hair finished getting to his feet near the head table. And in a voice that filled the entire ballroom, calm and certain and trained, he said 5 words. I didn't know his name yet. I'd learn it later. Sergeant Major Frank Holloway, retired, 30 years in the Corps, a guest of the Whitfield family, and an old friend of Sloane's late grandfather. But in that moment, all I knew was that an old man across the room had locked his eyes onto the rose on my chest, onto one medal in particular, and that his whole bearing had changed. He'd been a guest at a wedding, soft and social, a moment before. Now he stood like a man at attention, shoulders squared, chin level, and his eyes had gone bright and hard with something I recognized because I've felt it myself. Recognition. He knew exactly what that small silver star meant. He'd probably stood beside men who'd earned it. He'd maybe carried friends who hadn't lived to wear it. You don't spend 30 years in that world and not know, on sight, across a crowded room, what a silver star looks like on a young officer's chest. His glass was already on the table. His napkin had slipped from his lap to the floor and he hadn't noticed. The whole room had its attention split now between me and this old man rising at the head table, and the quartet finally faltered and went quiet. One instrument at a time, until the only sound was a single violin trailing off into nothing. My mother was frozen in the center of it all, caught between her son's wedding and the daughter she'd ordered to the back. And Sergeant Major Holloway took a breath that I could see lift his chest, the kind of breath you take before a command. And he gave the room the truth my own family had spent 10 years refusing to say out loud. Silver star in the room. That's what he said. 5 words. In a voice pitched to carry across a parade ground. Steady, and clear, and absolute. Silver star in the room. And then he did the thing that broke the dam. He brought his right hand up, slow and precise, and he held a salute. An old man in a tuxedo, at a wedding, rendering honors to a captain he had never met, because the medal on her chest had told him everything he needed to know. The words landed on that ballroom like a stone in still water. I saw people's faces change as the meaning reached them, the ones who understood first explaining it with their expressions to the ones who didn't. Silver star. Not a parade, not a phase, not an embarrassment. The 3rd highest award this country gives for valor in combat, and it was standing 10 feet inside the back door, where my mother had tried to seat it out of sight. I stood very still. I'm trained for incoming, not for this. A salute from a stranger across a wedding floor undid something in me that years of being ignored had welded shut. My eyes stung. I did not let them fall. I came to attention, the way you do, and I returned his salute, crisp and clean, the way Danny would have wanted me to. And in the silence after that, in the held breath of 150 people, I heard a chair scrape against the floor somewhere to my right. Then another, to my left. Then a third, near the windows. People were standing up, not the whole room, specific people. And I realized, as I looked around, that I was not the only one in that ballroom who knew what that ribbon cost. They stood one at a time, and I will see it every day for the rest of my life. A man at table 4, maybe 60, in a dark suit, pushed back his chair and rose and squared his shoulders. A woman near the dance floor in an evening gown stood and lifted her chin, and I saw it in her stance, in the way she held herself, before I saw anything else. A heavy-set man by the bar set down his drink and got up slow, one hand on the table, an old wound in the way he moved. An older gentleman, a man my own age, a woman with gray hair pulled back tight. One after another all across that ballroom, scattered among the 150 guests like seeds you didn't know were planted, they rose to their feet. I counted them later, because I needed to. 12. 12 veterans in that room, guests of the Whitfield family, and every one of them stood. Some saluted. Some just stood at attention, eyes forward. The civilian version of honor that says "I see you" stood on top of the roads and the names and the morning and Danny Brennan, 19, from a town in Ohio with one stoplight. I stood in the center of that silence in my dress blues with my hand at my brow, and I let them honor what my family had spent a decade trying to bury. And somewhere to my left, in the frozen heart of that beautiful room, I heard my mother make a small sound, a kind of broken inhale, as the full weight of what she had ordered hidden finally landed on her in front of everyone she had spent her life trying to impress. It was Gerald Whitfield who finally moved. Sloane's father. The patriarch of the family my mother had been performing for all weekend. The refined people who were not supposedly our kind. He crossed the floor toward me through that silence, and he was not appalled, and he was not embarrassed. His eyes were wet. He stopped in front of me and he did something I never expected. He took my gloved hand in both of his and he held it. "Captain Meyers," he said, loud enough for the room, "we are honored to have you here." And then he turned, still holding my hand, and he told the room the thing I had been walking past all weekend. "My father," he said, meaning Sloane's grandfather, the man in the black and white photograph, served 2 tours in the Corps. He came home and he built this family on one rule, that we never, ever forget what people like the captain pay, so the rest of us can stand around in a room like this. He nodded toward the brass plaque by the door. The scholarship. The foundation in the old man's name. Half the people standing in that room, the 12 and more, were there because the Whitfields had spent 3 generations gathering veterans close and honoring them out loud. The very family my mother had been so desperate to impress, the people she'd called refined, the ones she insisted would be humiliated by a uniform, were the people on this earth most likely to understand exactly what I was. She had read the room perfectly backward. She had hidden the one thing this family would have stood and saluted. And as Gerald Whitfield spoke, I watched my mother's whole strategy come apart in real time, in front of the audience she'd built it for. Every word from his mouth, another brick falling out of the wall she'd spent her life building. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she opened her mouth, and whatever sympathy I had drained right out of me. My mother found her voice, and she used it, the way she always had, to reframe. She came toward me through the crowd with both hands out and her face arranged into pride, and she said it loud, for everyone. "We are so proud of her. We've always been so proud of our Tori." She reached for my arm like she'd reach for a prize, claiming me now in front of the Whitfields, now that the room had decided I was worth claiming. A few people who didn't know better smiled, relieved, ready to believe in a nice family moment. But it was too high and too fast, the voice of someone improvising over a collapse. And when she saw in my face that I wasn't going to play along, that I wasn't going to smile and let her rewrite 10 years in 10 seconds, her composure cracked. The pride curdled into something else. "Don't do this," she whispered, "just for me now. Don't you embarrass me in front of these people." There it was. Even here. Even now, surrounded by people on their feet for me, her fear was still that I might embarrass her. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that. The whole room was watching, and I felt, for the first time in my life, completely calm in front of my mother. "You spent the weekend afraid I'd embarrass you," I said, quietly, and the quiet carried further than any shout. "You sat me at the back. You called this a parade, and these people, the ones you wanted so badly, just stood up for the exact thing you were ashamed of. She had no answer. Her mouth worked. Her eyes darted to the Whitfields, to Gerald, to the standing veterans, looking for an ally, for someone to tell her she was still right, and she found no one. My father had gone gray. Wes had stood all the way up at the head table with his hand over his mouth, and the room just waited, in the silence my mother had built and could not now escape. I turned away from my mother because she wasn't who I wanted my last words in that room to be for. I looked at Sergeant Major Holloway, still standing, and at the 11 others, and I dropped my salute and I gave them a small nod that I hoped carried everything. Then I spoke to the room, calmly, briefly, because a Marine doesn't make a speech out of this. "Thank you," I said. "You have no idea what it means that you stood." And then I told them the only thing that mattered, the thing my family had never once asked to hear. "I didn't earn this alone," I said. I reached into my coat, behind the medals, and I took out the coin, Danny's coin, worn smooth from 6 years of my thumb, and I held it up so the light caught it. "There were 4 of us in a vehicle one morning," I said. 3 of us came home. This belongs to the one who didn't. His name was Danny Brennan. He was 19. He gave me this for luck the week before, and he made me promise to carry it. So I carry it. Every day. The medal isn't mine, not really. It's his, and the other names you'll never know. I stand here because they don't get to." The room was so quiet I could hear my own pulse. I closed my hand around the coin and put it back over my heart, where it lives. I had not attacked anyone. I had not said a word about a group chat or a back table or a decade of being hidden. I didn't need to. The truth was standing in 12 people and 1 old salute, and it had done all the work that needed doing. That's the thing my mother never understood about the uniform and about me. It was never a weapon I was hiding. It was just the truth. And the truth had only ever needed one thing from me, to stop helping them cover it up. People sat back down slowly, the way a tide goes out, and the music started again, soft, and the wedding remembered it was a wedding. But before the room could fully fold back into itself, Wes came down off the dais. My little brother crossed that whole ballroom in front of his new wife and her whole family, and he stopped in front of me, and for a second, he just looked at me. Really looked. The way you look at someone you're seeing for the first time, even though you've known them your whole life. "I didn't know," he said, and his voice broke on it. "I never asked. Tori, I never even asked. He wasn't performing. There was nothing in it for him to perform. The Whitfields already loved him. He'd already won the day. This was just my brother, standing in the wreckage of a story he'd believed his whole life, realizing he'd believed it because not believing it would have cost him something. "I'm sorry," he said. He didn't dress it up. He didn't explain. He just said it. And on his wedding day, that took more than I expected from him. I put my hand on his shoulder, the way I used to when he was small, and the world was too big for him. "It's your day," I told him. "Go dance with your wife. Ask me about it tomorrow." And I meant the second part. Ask me tomorrow. Because there was a difference, finally, between us, between all of them and me. They had spent 10 years not asking. And one of them, at least, had just learned how. He nodded, wiped his face with the back of his hand, laughed at himself a little, and went back to Sloane, who was watching us with her hand pressed flat against her chest. The hard part was over. The reckoning was just beginning. My father found me near the windows a little later, away from the music. He looked older than he had that morning, smaller somehow, and he held something in his hand. An envelope, soft and creased, the kind of soft paper gets when it's been handled and put away and taken back out many times. He held it out to me. "I kept this," he said. "They sent it. After." He meant the letter. The official one. The one the Corps sends a family when something like a Silver Star happens. The one that says in careful language what your daughter did and what it cost. I never knew it had reached them. "I should have said something," he said, and his voice was rough. "All these years. I read this and I put it in a drawer, and I let your mother decide who you were." I'm ashamed of that. I want you to know I'm ashamed. I looked at my father, at the envelope worn soft from being read in private and hidden in public, and I felt the old pull to make it easy for him, to say it's okay, Dad, don't worry about it. I didn't. It's not okay, I said, gently, because gentle and honest can live in the same sentence. But I'm glad you finally said it. He nodded. He didn't argue. And for the first time in my life, my father and I stood in a true thing together, even though the true thing was that he had failed me. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a start. My mother tried one more time, near the end of the night, by the coat check, away from the crowd. She'd had time to rebuild her face. Tori, she said, we should put all this behind us. You made your point. Let's not let it ruin the family. It, she called it. Like the problem was the truth, and not the years of hiding it. I didn't fight her. I was done fighting her. Mom, I said, I'm not putting anything behind us and I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not hiding anymore. If you want me in your life, I'll be there. In my uniform. With my name and my history. The same as everyone else. But I won't sit at the back of it again. That's the boundary. Take it or don't. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. As for the rest, the fallout came quietly, the way real consequences do. Gerald Whitfield asked me to speak at his foundation's dinner that fall, and I said yes. Sloan started calling me on Sundays, just to talk, and meant it. The cousins who'd stacked their little stones at lunch got very interested suddenly in my career. And my mother's careful social standing with the Whitfields, the thing she'd schemed the whole weekend to protect, never quite recovered. The room had seen. You can't unsee a thing like that. Here is the only lesson I took from that whole strange weekend, and I'll give it to you in one breath. The people worth impressing already understood what the uniform meant, and it was only my own family who needed to be ashamed of it, and their shame was never, not for one single day, my weight to carry. That's my story. One uniform. 12 people who stood. If someone ever asked you to shrink to keep the peace, take this as your sign to stop. Share this with the person who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.